All right, I am not going to talk to you about classical education specifically, but we have your students 10 to 18 hours a week in our classes, and the rest of their lives are spent hopefully with you continuing their classical education on the home days, in the evenings, on the weekends. And so my next little 40 minutes is going to be, I call it, it's a nice clunky title, 7 Essential Culture Changes for a Classical Home. That's awful. I wish I could come up with something catchier. But essentially, if you're going to have a classical education for your kids, you have to have a home that supports it. And I think the typical modern American home is quite hostile to a classical education and could be systematically dismantling the very classical education that you're trying to get for your children. And so I want to encourage you through this time to either continue doing some of the things that you are doing well, or maybe push you to make some changes that would help support this classical education and continue it. And so, because a classical education is more than just a few little tricks that we use in the classroom. It's an entirely different culture. And so I'm not going to tell you when to click, so you're going to have to try and follow with me. But if you click to the next slide, I remembered this time. We have an entirely different culture. We are people with different goals. We're soul-focused. We like to cultivate wonder and curiosity, not just rational thought. We have a different content, the great books, 7 Liberal Arts, Latin, different setting, a more disciplined setting often, training up children in the paideia of God. Different methods, different pedagogy, the trivium. It's an entirely different culture. And some of you who may be brand new to classical education might be feeling a little bit overwhelmed by it. And I'm starting my 6th year with classical education. I hadn't been around it prior to coming to Veritas. And at first I was really overwhelmed with how much I had to learn. And now I'm even more overwhelmed with how much I have to learn. But I know so much more than I did back then. Just start growing. You have to start somewhere. Set a reasonable goal for this year and start making a few changes, start learning a few things. Don't try and do it all at once, you'll burn out, but make a goal that after 5 or 10 years, you really do understand this model of education and your home really has a culture that supports it. So that is my goal today. I'm going to cover a lot of ground, but I hope that you will leave with maybe 1 or 2 things that you feel God is sort of nudging you to adjust in your lives. So again, don't leave overwhelmed thinking you have to do everything, although I did call them all essentials, so maybe that's misleading. Don't leave with that ruining your world. Just try and think of 1 or 2 things that you want to change. So here are your 7 essentials. The first one, and I don't know Latin, but I found some cute little Latin phrases at a conference this summer. The first one is festina lente, and I don't think we're following along with the PowerPoint. We're getting there, maybe. So festina lente is make haste slowly, is what the Latin phrase means. And I guess other ways you could think about it are things like master each step, or the carpenter's dictum, which is always measure twice, so that you don't have to buy a new board. Benjamin Franklin's haste makes waste. Take a long time planning the war so that once you engage, you win it quickly. I guess another way to think about it is the time it takes to master any discipline is 3 to 4 hours a day for 10 years. So if you want to become a master at something, 3 to 4 hours a day for 10 years. That's 10,000 hours of practice to become a master. So if you never spend time doing one thing, and slowly progressing in it, you're going to spend your life never actually mastering anything. You'll just be semi-good at everything. That was my issue with sports. I loved all of them, and so I was mediocre at everything and never all that good at anything. Although I'm not certain that that's a bad thing with sports. Those of you who think you have to do club volleyball starting at age 3 or something like that. But that's a different topic for a different time. So what are the implications? The main implication for this is for our school. If we as a school, and we're really thinking about this for our curriculum, if we are not making haste slowly in our scope and sequences of school, then you are trying to keep up with us, and your home days are, you're not able to make haste slowly. You're just rushing to get done by 10 o'clock at night. And so we are really evaluating this, and this is why we are constantly trying to balance between workload and preparation. And we have to have a certain amount of rigor and a certain amount of things that need to be done. So it's a constant balance. But you'll hear us, we'll send out workload surveys this year. Please respond to those to help us maintain that balance, whether we're on the light end or the heavy end, but we want to strike that delicate balance. And it is delicate. We'll be heavy at times, we'll be light at times, and we're going to be making adjustments as we go. So we need that feedback from you. But if we get it right at school, then there are some implications for you at home. On those home days, don't just always do checklist all the way through. Allow there to be some times where you do just allow your students to dive in and really soak in something. Hey, so can you go back and show them the cool images really quickly? Because we're still on number 1. So there's the tattoo. You like that? And a couple organizations. And if you go back up a little more time. Yeah, so there's some images from history. You got the rabbit jumping out of the snail shell, because you're making haste, but you're doing it slowly. There's the coin, and then one more time, this is Aldous' stamp, just so you can see it. All right. So another way you can think about this, the grammar stage. Some of y'all were hearing what we get to do in logic and rhetoric, and I'm the head of I forgot to introduce myself. I'm the head of the upper school, so 5th through 12th grade, and I love what we get to do up there. And it's effective because the students have things to think about. They have a knowledge base. They have a foundation. They have all those pegs. But in the grammar stage, if I were a grammar teacher, I would be constantly trying to rush out of that. But just allow that stage to be what it is. Make haste slowly, lay that foundation, plan the war so that when you get to logic, you can actually be victorious. So don't feel rushed. If all your kids are in the grammar stage and you're hearing all this great stuff about the great books and critical thinking and making connections, you'll get there, but this foundation is essential. And I guess another thing, just taking Aldous' attention to detail is a good thing. Those of you who are perfectionists, you can ignore that because you don't need to hear that. But those of you who are not, attention to detail is a helpful thing, and so it's a good thing. All right, second essential is another Latin phrase, multum non multa, which stands for much, not many. Much, not many. Less can be more. So in your school, in your life, are you jet skiing through life or are you scuba diving? So we tell our teachers, if you go to the lake that is your subject, are you taking your kids and putting them on a jet ski and just driving around to every cove and saying, hey, check that out, not even slowing down as you get by? And there's a really nice cliff, and there's a tree, and there's probably some fish under us, and just zipping around the lake and then getting back on the trailer and driving off? Or are you scuba diving and allowing them to really understand, driving to one cove? So you do need to get through some content quickly. Otherwise, you'll never get to the coves, right? So I think I picture scuba gear on a jet ski. You're jet skiing to the cove, and then you hop off, and you dive down, and you really spend some time getting to know that cove, the depths of it, the rocks, all the fish. And that's a great way to do life. So thinking about that applied to your home. Are you the families who go to Colorado and you leave at 8 o'clock so you can drive straight through and never even make restroom stops? And is the goal getting there, or are you the type who stops at every single historical marker and at Palo Duro Canyon and at Mount Capullin and at Cadillac Ranch and at White Sands? And are you which type are you? So I think it's good to rush to those spots, but then really go deep. Melanie Eloquin yesterday, for those of you who heard this, she had a great analogy. She talked about how she is at her house. Her kids have time to just sit around, but they were watching Monsters, Inc. the other day. So she's rushing around, because you have to rush a little bit, because you have to get some things done. But then she would sit and really soak in one part. Like, I love that part. So when it comes to their studies, the home days, you do need to cover ground, right? That's the practical reality of it. But allow yourself to get to those parts that you just love. I loved studying that in history, and just soak in it, even for 5 or 10 minutes. And really enjoy it with your kids. Okay. I guess the other way you can think about it is if you ask your kids to do too much, if they are involved in everything, then you're depriving them of the ability to master anything. Much, not many. Have them do the things that they do, have them put their everything into it, but help them limit themselves and only choose to do our sports and fine arts here and nothing outside of Veritas. Just kidding. They may be able to do some things outside of Veritas, but I just don't want to kill all of our programs by saying this, but they can't do everything. So you need to put limits. So I guess how do you do this? There's a session on mission. Do you have a mission for your family that says, here's where our family is going, by which you can evaluate all the things that you're doing? Or are you just randomly signing up for things and then running around like crazy getting to them? I'm sure you've all heard this analogy, and since you've all heard it, it is worth saying because it's really good. The jar with the rocks. So you take y'all are probably nodding because you heard it, so I'll tell it fast. You put the big rocks in. Is it full? If you fill a jar to the top with big rocks, is it full? If you haven't heard the analogy, you might say yes. But then if I were to take out some pebbles and dump them over there, they would go in and fill all the little cracks, right? And I'd say, is it full? And if you hadn't heard the analogy, you would say, yeah, it's full. And then I would take out some sand and dump that in. And I'd say, is it full? And you'd say, yes, it's full. And then I'd take out some water and pour that in. And if I were to start with filling the jar with sand, could I get those big rocks in? No, they wouldn't be able to fit. So you need to figure out what those big rocks are in your family. Make sure that they get in the jar first before you try and fill in the cracks with all the other little things. Otherwise, the biggest, most important things are going to get crowded out. And with that, I will move on to the third one, which is repetitio mater memoriae. Repetition is the mother of memory. This comes out in a few different ways, but one of them is classical education believes in two things. One is memory, which is really, really important, but the way you get that is by repetition. The way you get it, the goal is to commit into our souls the great beauties we've encountered. The way you get that is by constant repetition, repeating things over and over again. And so especially in the grammar school, there'll be a lot of repetition. And some of you will say, we already covered this. Why are we doing it again? There's a purpose because they're getting it into their memory. They're going to remember it forever, a lot of those things. And that's essential. So trust the repetition. Even if your child gets it, trust the process, trust the repetition, and encourage your child to do that. And that's also true in the older grades. They have to review, they have to repeat, they have to bring those main things in. Now, as far as your culture, Deuteronomy 6 says, teach these things diligently to your children. Y'all, I'm sure have heard that verse far too many times, but it says teach these things diligently. That word, teach these things diligently, is one word in the original Hebrew. And perhaps if we still had a good vocabulary, a better word would be the word inculcate. Inculcate these to your children. And the word inculcate has an image of a hammer and metal and just hitting it until it flattens out. I'm not saying to hit your kids, but it's a repeated hitting. And so to inculcate these truths is to not just say, I covered those one time so you got it. It's constant, repeated covering of things throughout the course, especially those most important things. Constantly put those before your kids. Deuteronomy 6 is talking about the greatest commandment. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And I would now add the gospel of Jesus Christ is an essential thing to have before your children all the time. Every time you discipline them, let it be an opportunity to share the gospel with your kids. If they are believers, reshare the gospel with them. Inculcate that until it becomes a part of their soul. Okay, number 4 is wonder and curiosity. Now, wonder is something that starts with you. You have to allow yourself to wonder. And most of us don't, because wonder is one of those things that we view as kind of naive and childlike. Like if you were to walk into a room and see a young child pulling down a helium balloon and just, and then pulling it down again and just being awestruck every time it goes back up again, and doing that over and over again, you think, oh, that's cute. He's amazed by this thing called helium. But if you saw an adult doing that, you walk into a room and there's an adult who's just, you would say that is kind of childlike. That adult is a little bit, he needs to grow up, you know? We all know how that happens. It's helium, and helium rises because it's less, we're rational. We're trained to be rational in our thought, not to wonder. And so we need to start allowing ourselves to wonder again. And a great book by a German back in the 1950s named Josef Pieper, he wrote a book called The Philosophical Act. And he said this: our sense of wonder, in the philosophical meaning of the word, is not aroused by enormous sensational things, though that is what a dulled sensibility requires to provoke it to an experience of wonder. Go back to that real quick. So this is the foundation. Wonder in his mind is not being amazed by something huge and explosive. It's not, when you go to a James Bond movie and there's huge explosions, you're like, oh, yeah. He's saying in the philosophical meaning of the word wonder, that is not wonder, all right? Wonder is wondering, being in awe by the simple things, all right? It's the simple things in life. And so he says a dulled sensibility requires the sensational to evoke that response inside of you. Okay, go ahead now. A man who needs the unusual to make him wonder shows that he has lost the capacity to find the true answer to the wonder of being. The itch for sensation. It's a phrase that's kind of convicting. The itch for sensation is a sure indication of a deadened sense of wonder. And I think about some of the movies that I watched when I was a kid that were riveting. I watched last week we watched Honey, I Shrunk the Kids with our kids. And I hadn't watched it since I was a kid. And when I was a kid, that show just blew me away. I mean, the thought of how complex that backyard was and how amazing it would be to slide down a huge piece of grass. And I rewatched it, and I was just, well, this is kind of cheesy. And, I mean, my sense of wonder has been dulled. It's been deadened. I think that we have all been drastically dulled in our ability to simply marvel at simple things and be amazed by them. So our children are born this way. They're born natural marvelers. They wonder. And I think that we deprogram them throughout education, throughout life. Let's first model wonder for them by wondering ourselves, and then let's not deprogram them. Let's fight to help them wonder at the simple things. And there's ways you can do this. You can just, it's as simple as just pointing out these simple things and taking the time to stop and be in awe of them. Don't just walk by a huge tree and walk by it. Every time I love trees. Every time we have a tree in our backyard that is the best tree in the state of Texas. I really believe that. It is amazing. Every time I step in my backyard, I am just taken aback by it. And I tell my kids, that is so cool. Look at that tree. There's a guy at a conference I went to this summer who said that he had a similar experience. He was walking through this man's property with this man, and there was this cedar tree, which I know cedars aren't great, but it was the biggest cedar tree he had ever seen, and he just stopped and was just struck by it. And he just told his friend, he said, look at that tree. That thing is awesome. And his friend stopped, and he thought he maybe have gotten through him, and his friend says, how much do you think I could get for that? I mean, that's the way we are. We are pragmatic. We're practical. We can't just wonder anymore. So life and education should not be completely pragmatic. We have things in our curriculum that we continue to teach, even though they are not useful at all. We teach them because they're beautiful and because they're worthy and because they evoke wonder in us and they make us love God more. Well, I guess that's a practical thing. We teach them just because they're beautiful, and there's a natural outcome that they make us love God more. So we need to impart in our kids a love for truth, goodness, and beauty for the sake of truth, goodness, and beauty, not for the sake of any practical vocational end. And another great book, so I should be showing these to you, This book, I think it's already sold out at our book table, unfortunately, but this is a great book. I'll talk about the main title. It's Leisure, the Basis of Culture, but in the back half of it is Pieper's The Philosophical Act. So that book I was telling you about, it's 2 books in one, bonus, and that's that book. Another great book is this book called Beauty for Truth's Sake, and it's the subtitle is On the Re-Enchantment of Education. Isn't that a great title? On the Re-Enchantment of Education. And he says in this book, he says, we are reduced, this is the next quote there, we are reduced to being consumers and producers, producing merely in order to consume. We have more and more stuff, but the world seems thinner and less substantial, and our own souls also. So, stop being consumers and producers and allow your kids to experience not a thin and insubstantial world, but allow them to experience the wonders that God has put into this world. And another pragmatic outcome of this is if you look at the best scientists throughout history, science is my background. If you look at the best scientists, were they motivated by a paycheck? Or were they motivated by a question that was just plaguing them? They were Christians, and if you really get to the bottom of their motivations, they were motivated by desire. They were motivated by wonder. They knew that their God had put into the world order, loveliness, beauty, majesty, and they wanted to discover it. They had this longing to see that. And I think that if we can produce children who have this sense of wonder, we will produce some of the best scientists in our future coming generations, and actually scientists that this world desperately needs. All right, our next essential, after wonder and curiosity, is time-honored truths. We have 2 jobs when it comes to these time-honored truths. The first one is to cultivate zeal for what is worthy of study. Every student is a learner. Every human is a learner. Everyone is a student of something, and they're going to be a student of what they are most passionate about. You are going to study what you love. And every one of you learns things every day, and because no teacher right now probably is making you learn things, what you are learning is what you're most passionate about, by and large, or what you're getting paid to learn, but that's a different thing. Our job is to cultivate zeal in them, to cultivate their passions for what is actually worthy of study. And there are things, these time-honored truths, that are worth studying. And we want our kids to love those things and pour themselves into, not just while they're under our care, but for the rest of their lives, a pursuit of growing in knowledge in these areas. In this book, again, Beauty for Truth's Sake, Caldecott describes modern students, and he describes them this way. He says, they expect instant answers, but they have no deep questions. The great questions have not yet been woken in them. So we need to awaken the great questions in our kids' minds and have them truly longing to find the answers to those great questions. And all the things of classical education are a great way to do this. The things that Starla was describing, the great books, the discussions, and I hope that you will engage in those with your kids at home. Our second job is to train their affections. So we need to help them desire to know what is worthy of study, and we need to train their affections to love what is good, true, and beautiful, to love those things. And I think the first step of this, it always starts with you. You need to train your own affections. If you can't fake it, this generation more than any other values authenticity, and so if you're faking it, they're gonna sniff it out and they're gonna run the other way. So if you don't start with your own affections, you're not going to ever be able to train your kids. So let's say you don't like these things that are good, true, and beautiful. You hate art museums. You hate classical music. Just the problem is not with the great works of art or the great musical pieces. That's not the problem. The problem's with you. So just force yourself to like them, because if you don't like them, then you're wrong, because they're great. So I had to do this. I was not much of an art lover or a classical music lover, and so I just said, you know what? I'm going to like them. And so I started just choosing, because some of these things, this is a choice, right? A lot of these things in life, if your kids say, I hate that, I hate math, that you say, well, math is worthy of study, so that's a choice you're making, and you're going to choose to be passionate about it. And don't give them the option. Don't give yourself the option. So train your own affections. Expose yourself to some of these things that are good, true, and beautiful, and choose to love them. And I think you will over time. Take time to notice the good, the true, and the beautiful around you. And part of this is those first two things, slowing down, making haste slowly. You can't enjoy those things if you don't slow down a little bit. Plan outings to museums. Be willing to go and look. There's a link, and I'm not a linguist, but there's a link between museum and music. You know, the words there, the great muses, and that's what museums are. They're meant to not just inform, but they're meant to get into your souls by showing you the beauties of all the things that they're trying to show you. So go to these museums and spend time there. We hated going to museums when I was a kid because my dad had a way of spending, if they said it's going to take you about an hour to get through this museum, it would take us 8 or so, because he would read every word, he would talk to every person, and I mean, we were just so annoyed. But it communicated something to us. That's maybe to the end of exasperation, so don't do that necessarily, but it communicated something to us. It showed us a love of learning and a love of acquiring that knowledge that it communicated to us that that's important. And to this day, I can't go through a museum. I kind of still want to just go and not read all the plaques, but I can't because I know that it's important because my dad modeled that. And I will quote C.S. Lewis, and this is, Starla actually read this. We didn't plan that. She read in The Abolition of Man, that section of The Abolition of Man that she read. This is the very next quote in The Abolition of Man. So it's kind of long, I apologize. It's a great book, especially that first chapter. It's titled Men with Chests. So he's talking about men who have hearts, who aren't just mind, who aren't just gut, but they have a heart. Because his point is, this is off topic, but I'll do it anyway. His point in the first chapter is that if we are just head and gut, our visceral man, then the human animal is going to choose what they desire. They're going to choose what their gut is telling them to do. They're going to act upon their desires. And no matter how much good they know in their heads, they will not choose the good because their gut is telling them. And so then he says we have to have an intermediary. We have to have a heart. We have to have loves for things that are worthy of love so that we don't just know what's right, but we love what is right. And then the combination of head and heart, if we are men with chests, we're going to choose what is good and right, even though our natural gut is telling us otherwise. So it's an interesting thing. And he says, he who has received this true education of the inner being will most shrewdly perceive omissions or faults in art and nature. And with a true taste, while he praises and rejoices over and receives into his soul the good and becomes noble and good, he will justly blame and hate the bad. Now in the days of his youth, even before he is able to know the reason why. And when reason comes, he will recognize and salute the friend with whom his education has made him long familiar. So he's describing this education of the inner soul, that even before they understand, they are recognizing the good and the right and choosing that and honoring that and recognizing the bad and the evil and rejecting it, essentially. So this is the true education of the inner being. And I always loved that. And I want that education for my kids. I want the education for myself. And what he's quoting here is he's quoting Plato's Republic. And this is just an interesting little side note that I've been thinking about this summer. And I looked at the context in the Republic. And here's the context. What is this education of the inner being, this true education of the inner being? Plato says, musical training is a more potent instrument than any other because rhythm and harmony find their way into the inward places of the soul, on which they mightily fasten, imparting grace and making the soul of him who is rightly educated or graceful, or of him who is ill-educated ungraceful. And also because he who has received this true education, and that's where Lewis's quote starts. So what is this true education of the inner being? In Plato's mind, musical training. I thought that was so interesting, that the value placed on music and on good music to get into the inward parts of your soul. And I know as a school, we have not done a great job of this. And we've offered classes, but we haven't really pushed y'all to sign up for them. And our music classes barely make every year. We've never been able to offer. We offer choir every year, and no one ever takes it. It's like zero enrollment. And we offer band, and it's very lightly enrolled in band. I would love to see some of you challenged by this and really engage in musical education. It doesn't necessarily have to be here. It can just be a musical education that you listen to good music and you discuss it. But I just thought that was an interesting little side note. Get some good music going on around your houses. Okay, moving on. Number 6. Liturgies. What these are rhythms, practices, traditions, routines that, without speaking a word, they shape children. So these things that go on in your lives shape children. One example of this would be the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, so this is a less Christian example, but you're in school, all growing up, you would stand up, you would rise, you would physically put your hand over your heart, and you would say the pledge while looking at the flag. And over the course of years of doing that, it inculcates in you a love of your country and a pride in your country. Do y'all see how the constant repeated practice produces something in you? Now, there are liturgical churches, and that's definitely something that is, in sync with this, but that's not what I'm going to be referring to when I'm talking about liturgies, because I think you can have liturgies in your life without attending a liturgical church. So there's a guy named James K.A. Smith. He wrote a book called Desiring the Kingdom, where he talks about the cultural liturgies, because there are liturgies in your kids' lives that they encounter constantly that are teaching them something exactly opposite of what you want them to be learning. Billboards, advertisements on TV, what their friends are saying. I mean, there's a culture that is training and shaping your kids all throughout every single day. And so we need to be putting in place these practices, these rhythms, these traditions, these routines that are going to shape them in the way we want them to be shaped, because they're being shaped by these liturgies naturally. So there needs to be some other liturgies that are better. Now, I'm just going to highlight a few. Some of these, going to church every Sunday, that's a liturgy, right? It's something that you do. It's a repeated routine practice. Prayer at every meal, at bedtime, family worship, if you do something like that. My family, we do a family worship every night before bed where we read the Bible, we do our memory verse, we pray, we sing, I bless them, and then it's bedtime. And it's exhausting at the end of the day. Sometimes I want to not do it, but we have not missed a day. This is just a non-negotiable in our family. Sometimes it's fast, sometimes we linger, but it's a non-negotiable for us. It's one of those routines that we've put in place. A few other ones that we're going to do as a school, and I just have some images up there. Go back to that one. If you're a student entering that classroom every single day, is that going to put you in a certain mindset as you enter your educational environment? What about this next classroom? A little bit different mindset, right? You're going to walk into that classroom, and so entering a classroom is a liturgy in a sense, right? Because you're physically doing it on a daily basis. If you enter that classroom, it's going to put you in a certain mindset. Now, what about this classroom? Is that going to put you in a certain... I couldn't find a room that looks exactly like we want our rooms to look, but when we get onto our new campus, we're really excited. We want our rooms to be beautiful. We're picturing your great uncle's den. Some works of art on the wall, some rich colors in there, and not just a bunch of cheesy educational posters. We want our students entering a place that is rich and is gonna it's gonna be a fun experience entering into these rooms. That's our hope. We'll see if we have the funds to do it. We may just have the first classroom with white walls and like the jail school. All right. We want our classrooms to be filled with intentional beauty, and I think that it'll be a little liturgy for our kids as they go into those. What about your homes? Are your homes full of clutter, or are they places where you're seeing beauty all the time throughout your home? My wife came home from a mop session and was challenged to get rid of everything in your house that isn't useful or beautiful. So just, if it's not useful or beautiful, get rid of it. So hoarders in the room, make your homes, make your homes a beautiful place. We do another thing at school, we call it the morning moment. Every day in 5th through 12th grade, from 8:20 until 8:30, we have a morning moment. And this is not to replace devotions, because we don't necessarily study the Bible. We hope that your kids will have read the Bible in the morning before they come to school, or maybe in the night, but we hope that they'll have some kind of devotions. But then they get to school, and we are exposing them to the good, the true, and the beautiful. We put up works of art, we play classical music, we show them pictures from nature, things that have just struck us as good, true, and beautiful. We put those in front of them every single school day for 10 minutes, and just there's no goal other than look at how beautiful this is. Listen to and to train their affections. And so we have this routine put in place because training those affections is so important to us. We want to have a tradition. And then there's physical practices are also a huge element of liturgies, and there's some simple things. Consider kneeling to pray or getting into a posture of prayer. That physical act communicates something to your kids. And some of you who grew up Baptist like me are going to say, no, we can't do that. But I would encourage you to get out of that box and be willing to, because it's a great way to do that. In our classes, we've never done this before this year, but we've been convicted this summer. Every time we read Scripture, we're going to have everybody stand. Just in honor of God's Word, we're going to stand. It's a physical act that communicates something to them. It's very small and short, but over the course of time, it's going to communicate something to them about Scripture. Okay, so consider some liturgies that you might put in place in your life. The last one is leisure. I could have given you another Latin word here. Scola is a Latin word for leisure. Also, the Greek word is skole, and from this word we derive an English word, school. Isn't that interesting that the location where we educate our kids is derived from the Greek and Latin word for leisure? I just found that to be quite interesting, and I think most modern day schools it's more like rush to class because you dropped off late, throw your stuff in your locker, slam the door, the bell rings, and you're running in there, and then the bell rings and you have 4 minutes to get to your next class, and you rush there, and then you have 4 minutes to get to your next class, and then you rush there, and that's school, and then you get up and you do it the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day. Unfortunately, our current grammar school and School of Logic schedules, mainly School of Logic, grammar school, they don't have bells, so they have a little bit more leisure there. Our logic schedule, and we don't know how to fix this without abandoning the university model altogether, is when they're here, it is just class. I mean, they're like, and it's not leisurely, and it stinks. But the home days can be, right? And so don't really fight the checklist mentality. Allow them, I would get started early enough so that your days can be so that there can be some room for leisure in them. And there'll be some days where you look at the list and you're saying, okay, we're just going to grind through it. And that'll be some days. But I hope that their schooling experience is leisurely. Our School of Rhetoric schedule, one of the reasons we made the change, so we don't ring bells at all in the School of Rhetoric. We have 10 minutes between class. Oftentimes students will go to class and then won't have a class the next time, so they can just linger and they can soak. And if you come and watch our rhetoric students, it is a leisurely school, and we think it's great. Not that our students don't work hard, they work their tails off, but the pace we have this built-in feel of leisure. It's not just funneling cattle to where they're going next. So what is leisure? This is a book I read this summer, Leisure, the Basis of Culture. It's the first half. The second half is the philosophical act. This is a great book. And Josef Pieper, he really pushes us to have leisure in our lives. And I think America has forgotten the importance of this. He defines leisure as what we do when we stop being productive. So when productivity stops, that's leisure. So he quotes a man named, he quotes two people and compares them to each other. This guy named Max Weber, he wrote a little work called Capitalism and Protestant Ethics. all right? And he didn't coin this phrase, but it's very telling that in that book on capitalism and Protestant ethics, he quotes, endorsing this as a philosophy that supports capitalism and Protestantism, one does not work to live, one lives to work. And capitalism thrives on this mentality, right? One lives to work. Aristotle, in his Nicomachean Ethics, says, we are unleisurely in order to have leisure, which is the opposite of that phrase. We are unleisurely in order to have leisure. Pieper also says, not everything is useless, which cannot be brought under the definition of the useful. There are things in your life that are not productive, you're not producing anything, you're not being useful to society, that are very, very, very important. And you need to have them in your life, you need to have them in your family. And this requires some self-control. I hope that you are self-controlled enough to have a Sabbath. It's a biblical command, and it is something that should be a part of your week. And God put that in there for our good. Man was not made for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath was made for man. That's what Jesus said. So take a Sabbath and have the self-control to make that a priority in your life. End your workday. Maybe I need to have the husbands in here for this talk. End your workday. I try not to, and need to be reminded of this constantly. I try not to bring work home. I try and have my work be here, and then when I get home, work is done, and it's time for family, and it's time for other things. And there are times when maybe that doesn't work, but make it a goal to have an end where work is finished. Control your screen time. I think that oftentimes we say leisure is sitting down in front of a screen. You know, I picture the modern American family. They do end their work, but then we actually had this going on in our house last night right after dinner. So we have this is confession time. We have a guest in town from Washington. She got here yesterday, and we finished dinner, and my brother-in-law was here, and after dinner, I opened my computer and checked a few work emails, right? And then I got convicted, so I shut it, and I was like, okay, I need to engage with them. And all three of them were on their individual computers. That was our family's leisure time. So we stopped, and we had a great conversation about, what was it? The quadricopter robots and giving them different personalities. It was really fun. It was completely unproductive, but it was. We laughed harder. We added many years to our lives for how hard we were laughing. It was great. So you need to just be willing to stop producing, be still, think, contemplate, have conversations that don't have an agenda, just conversations, and that is true leisure. So what is a good use of leisure? Have meals. Have good meals. I would challenge you, maybe more often than this, but let's say at least once a month. Let's start small. Have a 3-course meal that lasts for an hour and a half or 2 hours, a European meal. You know, have you ever been to Europe and had a meal with a family? It takes forever, and they won't bring you your check. It is, you have to sit there for 2 hours to get a check and pay for it. And it's so frustrating for us Americans, but have that happen in your house. Don't have any other agenda other than we're going to have a nice meal on this nice china, and it's going to be served in courses, and we're going to spend all this time having this meal that's enjoyable. Have that be the only agenda, and just see what happens. I bet if you put say no one gets up from this table until 8 o'clock, you might actually have a great conversation as a family. And invite others into that. Invite people over to have a great meal. Am I overtime? Oh, golly. Okay. I have to pitch one thing. Read the great works, the ones that Starla told you. I'd encourage you to read books. Read one with your kid every year, but the great books. If you are thinking about doing that this year, if you felt convicted that you need to pick up the Iliad or the Odyssey or one of those great books, you're going to do it, and then you're going to hate it, and you're going to put it down after 10 pages. So don't do it alone. Stop pushing me. Don't do it alone. We have great working relationship. We're starting a great book series for parents, and I would love to have y'all join it. This year, in the fall trimester, we're going to pay our teachers to teach you. So we're charging you $50 a trimester if you want to do it. We have to have 10 people sign up to offer it. So if less than 10 sign up, it doesn't make. And it's only the first 20. So come see me right afterward if you want to get on the list as the first 20. The fall trimester is going to be the Odyssey, and AJ Hannenberg is going to be up here Wednesdays from 2:30 to 3:25. I think we'll do it in this room, but I'm not sure. Wednesdays from 2:30 to 3:25, so right before carpool. AJ will be up here, and you'll be having Socratic dialogue about the Odyssey. He'll give you homework, and you'll get to have an opportunity to read that great book. The winter, Julius Caesar, Shakespeare's play, and in the spring, Dante's Inferno. So we're offering that to parents. Come sign up if you want. And I have other things, but I will pass the mic off to my mom. Thanks, y'all.